Hey friends, it's Elisa Jansen Jones, and this is the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we teach music educators like you how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. I am so grateful that you are spending this time with me today, and I really hope that you glean some great ideas and inspiration from this episode. I suspect that you will. Before schools shut down, when we kicked off the global pandemic nature of most of the last year, I actually had several podcast episodes pre recorded and ready to go, but they had to do with in classroom, in person learning. So I tabled them for the time being so that I could bring you more relevant, applicable, and timely content over the last year. I hope that I've done so. But these content pieces, these podcasts that I recorded pre pandemic, are still really good and are now becoming relevant again as we're looking at going back to in person learning. So you're going to see them pop up over the next few episodes, and I really hope that you enjoy them. Just keep in mind that they were recorded pre pandemic. So you might hear some references to not the pandemic. This episode is no exception. In this episode, we're talking about creating a classroom culture, which we really should revisit, which is why I'm making this one of the first return episodes. In this episode, Jeremy walks us through what we need to be doing to establish rapport, set up our classroom for success, and be able to have standards for classroom management. All of these things are great for us to look at right now and plan as we start looking forward at the next school year. We can almost look like this last year has been able to refine us. We've come through the fire of teaching in a pandemic, and now we have an opportunity to rebuild stronger and better than ever. So again, I hope you enjoy these episodes. Thank you for spending your time with me. And a big shout out to Smart Music, who has helped so many educators maintain thriving school music programs throughout this pandemic. They really have stepped up, and if you haven't tried them out yet, they may just be the exact tool that you need to help close the learning and knowledge gap for your students, especially if they've been mostly online this year, or maybe you haven't seen them at all. Now, without further ado, I sure hope that you enjoy this episode with Jeremy.
All right. Well, I'm Jeremy Ulrich. I am the Senior Division Director of Bands at Milton Hershey School in Central Pennsylvania, where I direct the high school concert band, marching band, wind ensemble, indoor winds, jazz band, and pit orchestra. I also teach music appreciation classes, intro to world music and music theory for 9th through 12th grade students. I've been teaching in my current job for 9 years, 4 years as part-time, and 5 years now as the full-time director of bands. And I earned my Bachelor of Science degree in Music Ed from Lebanon Valley College in Annville, Pennsylvania, and my master's degree in Educational Psychology from the University of Missouri.
Wow, educational psychology. That's not a very typical master's degree for a band teacher.
No, it is not. My interest with psychology really stems from the topic that we're talking about, which is this development of culture. I wanted to explore culture deeper. So the best route was to dig into psychology and how our students learn, why they learn, and then how as an educator, I can get to them and help them grow as not only students, but as musicians.
Nice. Do you think that a lot of music teachers are attracted to psychology?
I do. I think a lot of music teachers are attracted to psychology and practice it on a daily basis without really engaging it or writing it on a lesson plan or planning to do it. Psychology is just kind of natural to what we do.
What do you mean we practice it without really knowing it? How do you practice psychology?
practicing psychology without knowing it, to me, is the conversations we have with our students. We know that if we ask them to do certain things, they're going to either choose to do it or they're not. And so we have to figure out how to motivate them. So especially as a band director, there's so many times where you step into a band rehearsal and you know right away, this is my end goal and this is what I want to accomplish today. But you also know this is going on at school, X, Y, Z. These kids are going to struggle. This is going to occur. And you try to plan for it, but it doesn't always happen. And I think that's the practice of it. I think we know in our mind, psychology-wise, these are maybe some tricks I need to play to motivate my kids today. These are things I need to go at to help them along.
But isn't all motivation really just internal motivation? How much can we really do?
And that's a great question, because intrinsic motivation is what we strive for, but so many of our students are driven by extrinsic motivation. I think a prime example in the music industry is smart music. Smart music is something I've just recently started using a lot more in my band classroom. And it's just a great way to, hey, I'm striving, I'm doing a great job, I'm learning, and here's a reward. We're going to post it on a highlight board. We're going to post it on a scoreboard. Let's keep championing our scores and our job as we get better at it. So it's a little bit of both. You got to play the intrinsic and extrinsic at the same time.
So I've kind of talked on the podcast before about creating a classroom culture with Adam Paltrowitz from Choral Clarity. So this is going to take more of a band spin, I assume, right?
Absolutely.
But everybody's going to glean something about it.
And that's the main thing, is that although I'm a high school band director, culture is something that we do on a daily basis, and even in our classrooms, whether you're a pre-K elementary teacher or if you're a high school teacher or a director or a community director, culture is important no matter what, who you are.
So define for me what culture in the classroom really means. It doesn't mean like we're making yogurt or...
No, and that's the thing, is that I love defining culture. This is actually something I do with every single one of my classes, is I ask my students, define culture for me. Because if you ever look up the definition of culture, Merriam-Webster has tons of different definitions and Google has even more. And I think that defining culture in the classroom really comes down to shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize our institution and our organization. And that's a definition straight from Merriam-Webster.
So talk to me about how do you go about creating a culture? Just set me in the chair and lecture me. Ready to go.
All right. Creating culture in classroom, and I'm going to go from the band room perspective because I deal mostly as a high school director with the marching arts and the band. Creating culture is building a family. And that's what I go to right away. So if you think about your band or your class, you have to think about what are the values and what is the structure that you're trying to build within that program. So if you're going out for a concert, you have your band ready to go, the stage is clear, the audience is filled, and you're thinking in your mind, okay, I just want these kids to be prepared, silent, focused. I want them to get out on stage. I want all these things to go the way that I've envisioned them to go. That's actually part of culture. You're in your mind, you're prepping culture, and you have an idea of what you want your band culture to be. So now the thing is, we have to take it from this is my ideal culture to how do I get that and engage that with my students? And for me, it's living the example. So if I'm going to tell my kids, this is what you need to do, and this is how we be respectful in this process, I'm also going to demonstrate that for them. And so whether I'm trying to build a value of we're going to be improvising today, and there is nothing wrong with improvising, there's nothing wrong with standing up in the classroom and playing whatever you feel like, I have to be willing to do that as well and step outside of my box. And that helps build that culture and foster the growth that we're trying to get.
Okay, so how do we do that?
I think I think we do it by having real conversations with our kids. We do it by talking to them and being who we are, being an educator, stand up in front of them and demonstrate. For me, even when we go to wind ensemble or if I'm teaching indoor winds and we have to be competitive, the kids will do things and I celebrate it. Celebrate the most ridiculous things sometimes because it makes them feel comfortable. It makes them get out of their zone. And it makes them realize that it's okay to be me. It's okay to live in this culture that we're trying to grow, or it's okay to be accepted for who I am.
Can you have a negative classroom culture?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really tough thing to talk about because we don't want to ever go there. We don't ever want to deal with that.
We don't want to, but it exists. I mean, we've all known a teacher who has a toxic culture. We all have known students who, they're in their band program, but they're in cliques and groups and subgroups, and this group doesn't like that group, and these girls don't like those boys, and all that kind of stuff. So we have to acknowledge that it's out there. We've all seen it.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing is doing what you're saying, which is acknowledging it. My career has actually started my full-time career because of a culture change that was needed. And so I've been living that for the past 5 years of changing culture and making drastic changes to fit what the school and this organization needs. And doing that is challenging, to say the least. I mean, let's be honest, it's exhausting at times because we do get these clicks and we get this push and pull. We get this fear from sometimes our students. I still deal with that. Even today in my class, not 2 hours ago, we go to play a downbeat and there's like this fear that sets into them for whatever reason. And they're just afraid of the culture. They're afraid that somebody's going to call them out and make fun of them because they didn't articulate this right or this didn't go on. So negative culture is there. We just have to be really good at micromanaging that. And how do we deal with it? And that's kind of the big thing that we all do differently.
Can this be reflected in our policies and practices and discipline structure, or even on a different level with how we set up our classroom, how we have the look and feel of the space that we're in? Like, where does culture end, and where is a good place for us to start developing a more positive culture? It's not just in the band manual, right?
No, and I think that's exactly it. I don't think that it's just in the band manual. I think it has to be every aspect of what we do on a daily basis. So that means setting up my room to have a positive learning environment. It can just be organization. It can be how do you interact and cue interactions with your students. So it goes through all of that process, including discipline, because sometimes it does have to come down to discipline, but I think that's a lot of the last resort. And that kind of connects to our SEL portion. So as you are strict in a way and you define the lines of what culture is and what it means to you as the band director, because that's your job, we also end up with that gray area where we have to micromanage and then balance how much is nature and how much is nurture.
How much does the psychology really affect our students? What am I trying to say? Okay, let me give you an example.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily going to say this was from my high school experience.
Okay.
I was an idiot. I mean, this person in high school was an idiot. Probably had too big an ego and sometimes said some things to not necessarily intending to be hurtful, but to protect this person's own ego. And the band director perhaps is not listening to this, but maybe made some decisions to put that person in their place that had nothing to do with teaching music, that had nothing to do with leadership, but simply to teach the student a lesson. Is that a cultural piece that you think is beneficial, or is that kind of thing negative? where you end up giving a leadership role to somebody who maybe wouldn't be as good a fit, but to punish the other person.
I think what you just said was really important. The last statement, which was putting someone in a leadership role, not because they're the best fit, but to punish another person. That's something we have to be very careful of. And we have to be very careful of what was our intention. So if the intention was to punish someone, I'm not sure if that's necessarily good culture, nor is it good policy, where we always have to stay student focused and student driven. So in that case, I think there was a lot more steps that could have been taken prior to putting that student in that position where you've created even a larger issue at this point in time, because now you're kind of fostering some of this negativity, and in your mind or in the mind of the director, it may have been a good move at first, but it may not have ended the way that they envisioned it to be. So that can be a very difficult situation, but we all get there at some point where you make that decision in a classroom, and then you kind of think about it afterwards and realize that might not have been the best decision that I've made in my career.
I mean, this late in my life, I mean, in this person's life, I am so grateful that that happened because it
Right.
really did put me in my place. And I learned from that. Did I learn that lesson well? No. I still say stupid stuff, you know, but but I apologize now. At least now in hindsight, I see it. But where do we draw the line between just having a culture that fosters musical development and having a culture that fosters individual development? And I think they're different things. I think that our role as music teachers is the job description, and nowhere in the job description does it say attempt to manipulate your students to be better people. I don't think that is said anywhere in our job descriptions. So where do you draw the line between just teaching them music and teaching them to be people?
That's a fantastic question.
Because I'm not their parent. I guarantee that I parent the heck out of my kids, but my
Yeah.
students are not my children. So where do you draw the line?
And that's, like you said, it's unwritten, it's undefined. As an educator, we have to always keep in mind that our job is to be the educator. Our job is to teach music. Our job is from whatever your work times are to the end of the day. But as you said, we also have a human job, and that is to help guide students in making correct decisions. The way I define the line is when it starts to become a personal issue, I'm willing to give advice. I'm willing to take on the parental role of saying, let's have a conversation about this. Do you need me to help mediate a conversation between you and another student? I will think about things differently from a student leadership perspective and wonder whether this is a student that can be a leader. Is this the right time? Do they need more maturity? But I do think we have to be very careful because we have mom, dad, grandma, aunt, uncle, whomever may be raising this child who's also parenting them. And so we have to be careful on that fine line between professional and personal. And so I kind of draw the line on if I feel like it's diving into personal, that's not my place. So I tend to hold firm on policy and just kind of be an assistant to guide them and help them make right decisions.
Hmm. And that can be hard to do because we care. I've never met a music, well, that's not true. I have met music teachers who are just there for the paycheck.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Unfortunately, yes.
but the majority of us are there because we do genuinely care, but we also need to know our bounds. So we kind of dived really deep there, Jeremy.
We did.
But so what are the benefits of having a culture around, and I love that the word cult is in culture, right?
Absolutely.
But what
Yes.
are the benefits what if we have a solid classroom culture both musically and personally?
I think the benefits for me I see on a daily basis, which is my student leaders know the boundary between when they step into the room, they're not a student that's necessarily in that friend role, but they almost assume a quasi teacher role. And so they know the expectations. And so the benefit comes from they can help have that close conversation that a student maybe isn't willing to have with an adult or a teacher. They help guide your sectionals. They help actually take what a first chair trumpet player would be. That first chair now is their section leader. It just helps overall in helping to push us and process our ensembles a little bit differently. And that happens in the classroom. So I know I'm using a lot of ensemble vocabulary here, but really in the classroom, it's the same thing. And these kids help just kind of foster that growth and positivity that we're trying to get in our classrooms. And that's why it's so important to build this culture.
So, how do we remind us again how we go about building culture? Like, I want really specific checklist of things.
For me, building culture starts with structure. It does start with my band handbook, but I honestly take it beyond that. And I talk to my kids about it. I lay down, here's the policies and here's the things that we're going to be doing. But we need to step outside of our comfort zone. We need to be willing to accept one another, show mutual respect, show a positive spirit, and support one another. And when individuals in the ensemble or the classroom or wherever we are go against that, I call them out sometimes. And I'll call them out and say, I really don't want to do that. We need to help foster growth. No matter what's going on, even if it's a negative thing, it's about positivity and it's about celebrating the good that can come out of maybe a negative situation. So for me, concrete is write down your policy, enforce your policy, but be a human and lead by example.
How much does our teaching philosophy come into play as we develop what we want our classroom culture to look like? I know for young teachers, it's hard to define what your teaching philosophy is. I know for me, it took probably the first 3 years of teaching to be like, oh, yeah, okay, now I have a philosophy of teaching. But how is that a good place to start? Is to know why we're teaching? What's the point?
I think it's a great place to start because we're being honest with ourselves. If we have a philosophy that we truly believe in, that helps us emit that positivity and that commitment to our students. So I do think philosophy is important. I think it is hard though, because a brand new teacher, if we're going to have this culture talk to with a brand new teacher out there first year, and I'm sure you're going to have some listeners that are in their first year, first semester teaching, it can be difficult to identify that philosophy and pick up exactly where is that line and where is that boundary. So just stay true to yourself. Why are you teaching? Why did you become a music educator? What do you want to gain from your job on a daily basis?
Those are very deep questions.
They are. I don't think we have enough time to answer those today.
No, but how do we so let's say that we do recognize that we have created, maybe not by any fault of our own, but maybe by, sin of omission, that now there's some negativity in our classroom culture. People nitpick each other. Like you said, they don't want to play in front of the group because they don't feel safe. How do we reset? How do we hit that reset button and go, guess what, guys? We're turning it around and it happens right now.
The reset button is really about how you approach a subject. So prime example for me, we're in indoor wind season. My program's getting ready to compete at WGI. And every time we do a final run of the show, we come in, we sit down and we do a critique. And I always ask my students, tell me 3 things that are positive, tell me 3 things that are negatives or things that need to be worked on. And right there, I catch myself because I tend to say negatives. That's a word we didn't need to use. I could have said, what are 3 things we need to work on to improve? What are 3 things that you would like to be better at in the next run? So it really comes down to even semantics at times.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like to really reiterate in a lot of my conference presentations this whole stay positive idea. Stay positive, because we are naturally humanly adapted to look for the negative. That's how we survive. That's like our
Absolutely.
survival instinct is to find that one thing that sticks out and not the many beautiful trees in the forest, but the one that's dying that's going to make everything sick and rotten. So we have to acknowledge that there's some evolutionary response to negativity, but also that we can change that based on practice. So talk to me about the importance of repetition and consistency in our teaching practice.
The positivity is exactly what you need, even in the repetition and being consistent. When you're repeating something over and over, and we do this in our band room all the time and in our classroom, you're getting ready for a test, you're getting ready for a concert, and you'll continually want to stop and here are all the things we need to fix. But instead of all the things that we need to fix, because we do need to talk about those, it's also really important to, in your classroom, go, hey, so-and-so, that was an outstanding job. That articulation was perfect. Now, can we all try to emulate that articulation? And by just kind of rephrasing and twisting things, you've now engaged students without that negative thought, and then repeat it, replicate it, and continue to do those things. And what starts to happen is we go from this negative, I'm not sure if I want to do it, to he got positive, reinforcement there. I want positive reinforcement. I'm going to articulate better. I'm going to try harder. And so that starts to build, which circles back to the beginning of our conversation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You start to build that intrinsic motivation through repetition.
So how do we set up our policies and classroom rules to be more positive?
I think it's all about being, let me reword that.
That's fine.
I think our policy can demonstrate the positivity by focusing on all the things that we want to see from a program. So I'm not saying we should never be negative. We should never provide critique. We should never lay out the discipline policy. However, that handbook should really be about, this is what I want you to do on a daily basis. I want you to put your instrument back in its locker and not just on the floor. But you don't need to include the not on the floor part. And then just reinforce that policy, which is just really, it's kind of counterproductive because we don't think of that. We think, hey, Johnny, you didn't put your trumpet away today. You got to put it in your locker every single time. That's what we're going to do when we catch Johnny doing it for the 20th time. But you really want the policy to just say, your instrument goes in your locker at the end of rehearsal. Folder goes in its slot. And you go down X, Y, Z. This is the policy that we're trying to enforce. And it just stays positive by avoiding negative thoughts.
Yeah, I always looked at it in my classroom as I want to tell them what to do, not what not to do.
Yes.
And I do that with my own kids. Instead of don't leave your things on the floor, it's, hey, can you pick your stuff up off the floor? Or hey, do something instead of don't do something. And it's those micro changes that just lighten up the situation. I feel like we get so serious about everything and we just need to calm down and be happy,
Absolutely.
I know that's sad. And maybe it's just because, I read a lot of people's opinions and stuff like that and the things that are frustrating. And I'm not saying you aren't totally allowed to be frustrated about things sometimes.
Absolutely.
But you're also allowed to shift your perspective and go, how can this frustrating thing, like this student always leaving their trumpet on the floor, first of all, if they're always doing it, then you need to change your approach, friend. because
Absolutely.
they've started to block you out. So,
Yes, they are winning that battle at that point in time.
right. So just try something. And that's the thing is we get frustrated if they don't learn something fast enough, but maybe we aren't teaching it in the way that they need to be taught, in which case we need to take another approach. If the balloon doesn't pop with you squeezing it in your hands, maybe try poking it with a pin, I don't know.
Right. And
Jump on it.
that goes to things like you were asking about with even how do you do that in your classroom or what does that look like? I can think of an example I've had that always frustrated me. My students would never put their folders away where they were supposed to be. So we have lockers in my band room that don't have solid sides per se. And if they slide their folder in and it's not quite right, it slips down the side and falls down like 4 lockers below it. So there'll be papers strewn throughout several lockers and they'll never have what they're supposed to. So I had a filing cabinet. I had this great idea and it was a slotted one. So they all had a spot for their folder. I put it in the classroom, put it there, told them, here's what we're going to be doing. We're changing this up. I want everybody, you have an assigned number. It was awesome. Best laid plan I've worked on for weeks. Finally got it working. It didn't work. Shocking, I know, but it just didn't work. And my kids were still like, there's folders, there's music missing, it's falling down, there's music sitting on stands. I was baffled. And I sat there in my band room for probably 20 minutes after this one rehearsal. And it dawned on me, the light bulb went on. And I realized I had the filing cabinet in the wrong location. And this may sound completely weird, but it was in the back of the room where all the lockers were. So my natural assumption was they go back through, they pick up their instrument, they get their folder, they come in, they have a seat and warm up. But that's not what they needed. What they needed was the filing cabinet to be right next to the door. So when they walked into the room, they grabbed their folder out. And when they walked out of the room, they put their folder in. And the second I moved it, it was like magic. All of a sudden, they're going, oh, I forgot my folder, because they could see it as they exited the door. So it's little tricks like that that I think we play in our classrooms to help foster that growth. Sometimes it's our own fault. We just make decisions and we don't realize it. Being reflective is the best thing we can do as educators, is think about, what did I do and did I trigger the response I'm getting?
Yeah, and be willing to admit when we're wrong. And I think that's really hard as young teachers because we feel like we should know everything right from the start and we just don't. So don't be afraid to acknowledge that maybe your classroom culture needs a shift. Maybe you need to reconsider those policies. Like, for example, maybe your class just hates doing playing tests in front of each other. In which case, maybe revisit, well, what is the point of playing tests?
Right.
Well, it's to test their, if they're practicing, it's to test their skills. I need to be able to hear that. Well, then why do they have to do it in front of everybody? Where's the benefit there? So you have a choice of going, well, the benefit of playing it in front of everybody is it gets them to be more confident. It allows other people to hear, the mini clinic that I'm going to give them and the pointers so that they all learn from each other. But maybe that doesn't matter as much as having a safe environment where they feel comfortable, in which case give them the option of like, send me a video or do some, flip video learning, that kind of stuff, or a smart music assessment, right?
Absolutely. And
So
that's exactly what I was going to say. That's why I made the switch to smart music. My students have this anxiety over playing in front of others. And honestly, playing in front of me, they get all worked up and they get anxious. So I've created a smart live studio where I have a practice room that's just dedicated for them to go in, close the door, and just play and just practice. And then I get to see what they're doing through smart music and I get to see how it's working. And that's changed, again, it's changed the culture for my classroom and it's been phenomenal so far. It's a great tool.
we really just need to look at it's less about our ego and more about our students' needs. You know,
Absolutely.
we why are we doing practice charts? Like, I just want to revisit every single thing that you think is annoying as a teacher and go, wait, why am I doing it then? Like an evening concert. Okay.
Hmm.
for example. And we might say that if you're there, it's a pass. If you're not, it's a fail. Or we might have like an entire agenda that they have to accomplish at this concert. I had it pass fail. If you're there, cool. If you're not, cool. Because you know what? They're kids. And often it's not up to them if they can make it to the concert or not. And I'm not going to dock them if they don't wear full concert black because it's not up to them to get their own clothing most of the time. And by putting that burden on our students, we might be saying, but it's my job to teach them this responsibility. But it's not. It's your job to teach them music. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes by having those additional expectations, how much anxiety are we really creating in our students? What's wrong with giving them a makeup assignment if their family happens to be out of town during a concert? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think everything you said is exactly correct. I've done that
I mean,
too for the
you don't have
longest
to say
time.
that just because I'm the host,
No,
Jeremy. You can tell me if
you're,
I'm totally barking up the wrong tree, but why are kids dropping out of music?
and that's it. I think it's that exactly. I honestly, everything you just said are things that I've lived through in the last 5 years as a full-time director. My course used to be pass fail based on, I mean, not the entire course, but your concert was like your final exam. And if you didn't show up, you got a zero. And I did. I looked at that a couple years ago when I was finishing up my master's, and I thought, this is ridiculous. They get a zero because you didn't show up to the concert, but they still did 99% of the work. So why am I judging them based on an hour and a half concert? And it really does go to that. And that is part of building this culture. If a student realizes that you're a real human being and you're going to understand that mom and dad had this scheduled, I know it violates policy. I'm not going to be at the concert, but you're going to give them the chance to come in and play it on smart music. Send me a recording. Enter it through Canvas or whatever LMS you're using with your school. Get me some type of recording that I can say, you've done your job. You're doing an excellent job as a student. That's okay. And when the kids realize you're willing to work with them and accept that, they're going to want to stay in your program. They're going to build that family culture with you.
Yeah, I mean, we can justify any policy that we want to have in our classroom. We really can.
Absolutely.
Because we can say, it's my job to train them. Well, maybe they need this kind of structure. Maybe they need it to be this way. But the truth of the matter should be we need to examine our motivations. And if we want a positive classroom culture, then we need to get rid of our own ego and just have a culture that serves our students, whatever that happens to look like.
And if you want to teach them that concert black and white and wearing a suit or a tux is the appropriate attire, then maybe take them to a symphony or an orchestra locally. Don't have them up on stage, but give them examples of it. Show them what you're trying to get at, but it should never be disciplinary. It should never get down to the point where you're going, I'm taking points off your grade because you wore sneakers. Maybe those were the only pair of sneakers or shoes that that kid had or was provided to him at that time. So we need to think about, I shouldn't get anxious as an educator and think that an administrator is going to see my program and dock me because Johnny had sneakers on. It's really
It
about,
sounds so ridiculous when you say it. Or they
it
were 10
does.
minutes late. Okay, well, maybe their mom was like shaking off a hangover. Come on now.
Right. Or running 5 kids to soccer practice and ballet and taekwondo, and you fill in the blank. And that's exactly it. Just be human, be real with the students, hold your expectations. Cause I don't want to get away from that. It is very true. We need to have policies in place. They're there for a reason, but also be willing to be flexible.
Yeah, I like that. And more than anything, just be accepting and open of your students.
Yeah.
I feel like we have grown up in this culture and you're a generation younger than me. So maybe
Yes, I am.
you don't get this, but what is it called? The not the guru. the something on the stand, come on, the something on the podium, the, it rhymes with podium.
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Where like I am the band director and I shall
Right.
stand up here and you shall all worship me and I am the music teacher and you shall listen to me and do everything that I say and I am always right. And we're afraid that if we let down our guard and show that, you know what, we're wrong sometimes and our policy isn't right, that actually does more for our rapport with our students than trying to force them to think that we're perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree because there's so many times where you want to portray confidence. We always should. It's a job of an educator. If you don't portray some confidence, the students will eat you alive. But sometimes we have to just admit that didn't work and that was my fault. I even mentioned that the other day to one of my programs. I can't think of the exact example, but they gave me the result that I asked for. And I realized I didn't define it correctly. It was not the result I wanted, but they gave me 100% what I asked for. And I outright I stood up in front of them and said, that was my fault. I'm going to own that and I'm going to make it right for you. And here's how. And that's okay because they realize that we make mistakes. Mistakes are okay.
Yeah, it's so funny with working with my community band because, we have teenagers in there and high school students and college students and professionals from 50 different career fields. And I screw up sometimes. And yet the band has respect for me. I know that they care about me. I know that they know that I care about them. And do you know what happens musically?
It's
Magical, wonderful things.
yeah,
I know that there is not anything that I could ask them to do that they wouldn't do to the best of their abilities. And over my years of being this director and acknowledging full well and breaking out in tears sometimes, like I realize that I have screwed up and I am sorry. But you know what? We're going to get through this. Let's do it together. And the band sounds amazing. And they have amazing performances, and the audience feels it. And that's because of the culture that we have of equal rapport and just genuine affection for each other. Not saying you have to love your students. God, you can hate your students, but at least have.
yeah. And
I'm
that's
just kidding. You shouldn't hate your
no,
students.
no, you should never. But here's the thing. This is what I tell my kids. I have a 2-year-old at home. So I've learned the true meaning of unconditional love because the terrible twos are an incredible thing that tries me at every turn. But our students in school are kind of the same way. And there's like a love-hate relationship. But I tell them all the time, it's unconditional love. I treat them as if they're my own children in regards to the way that I'm going to help guide them as human beings. But we're all in this together and we're all trying to build that family atmosphere. And it just comes from all of these great things that music educators do daily that we don't even identify. I don't think we sit back and go, oh yeah, I did that today. That was awesome. And it's really doing a great job. But we should. Sometimes we need to do that for ourselves to help ourselves realize that a lot of us are knocking it out of the park. A lot of us as music educators are doing a phenomenal job out there.
Well, we kind of got into some weeds, but hopefully there have been some little nuggets of wisdom that we've passed along to people.
I hope so.
Cool. Well, thanks, Jeremy. Is there any final words you want to say, or where can we go to learn more about SEL and classroom culture and all these wonderful things that you want to teach music teachers?
I think the last thing that I would like to leave with everyone out there is be a human being, be accepting to your students, be accepting to your administrators, and be willing to make mistakes and show your kids that you too are human. If you lead them by that example, they're going to follow you. And it is the greatest lesson that we can truly teach our students. The best reward you gain from that is 10, 15, 20 years into your career, and a student comes back and reminisces about moments like that in your classroom and with you as their teacher. So I encourage every educator out there to live the way you want your students to live in your classroom, and they will follow you.
Reestablishing your classroom culture is going to be amazing, and I can't wait to hear how it goes for you. I hope you enjoy our future episodes as we look back on our pre-pandemic time and some of the great information that can anchor us in our teaching and learning experiences. Thank you again for spending this time with me. And if you have anybody that you would like me to bring on the podcast, or if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, please just shoot me an email on Facebook. You can find me at musicedmentor or musicedmentor.com. I look forward to hearing your amazing feedback. Now, enjoy your time this coming week and take time for yourself and go forward fearlessly and keep teaching on.